Sunray, and welcome back to the My So-Called Thoughts podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Sunray, and I'm your host. I'm a wife, mama, and musician. And on this podcast, we like to talk about various life experiences. I like to talk about things that people are going through, experiencing, dealing with, healing from, and we just like to talk about it here. Various different things, my innermost thoughts, and also just thoughts that I feel like people tend to have but don't really like to talk about them. I like to touch on them and kind of expand on them and kind of start a conversation on most of those topics. So, as usual, if you listen to this podcast before, you know that I like to just dive right into what we're talking about. But thank you again for tuning in. I hope you are doing well. One thing I do want to add, wherever you are listening to the podcast, just so you know, all streaming platforms, so you that have more options, or you can send it to your friends or family or loved ones. This podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, of course. And there is an Instagram page. The Instagram page is at My So-Called Thoughts Pod. Again, that's at My So-Called Thoughts Pod. So thank you again for following. If you are following the Instagram page or subscribed on your platform of choice, be sure to leave a comment, a review on your opinions or your thoughts or anything of that nature. So this episode is kind of like a part two. Like technically you don't have to listen to the last episode to understand this episode. Last episode was what no one tells you about pregnancy, and this episode, it being kind of like that part two, is what no one tells you about labor and postpartum. Now, of course, prefacing, this is my specific story. Every woman has a different pregnancy journey, labor journey, postpartum journey, but this is my story. And I feel like there are just so many things that I was just not prepared for that I feel like not enough people talk about. So I just want to talk about those things, and I want to dive in while I'm kind of sharing my story and journey. So kind of picking up where we left off last week, but also just want to say you should check out last week's episode because it was a long one, but it was a good one. So please tune in. But just want to give a little backstory if you weren't able to check it out. Pretty much where we ended, but before going into the labor and postpartum aspect, my baby boy, about 1 year postpartum, if you didn't know, my baby boy was measuring quite larger. He was about a week and a half ahead my entire pregnancy, and because of this, and with no influence of my doctors or anything like that, I was concerned about delivering him. My husband and his brothers, they were large babies. I was over 8 pounds, a large-ish baby, and I'm more on the slender side. So that's kind of where we left off a little bit, just backstory. And this will matter once we go into talking about my labor story. My baby boy was measuring about a week and a half ahead, and I was concerned about having to have a C-section because he was too big. If you don't know, a lot of babies, at least the first baby, a lot of times can push you all the way into your like 41, 42 weeks. And because he was measuring so large, I was nervous about being in a position where I would have to have a C-section. I have no issues with C-sections. Just for me, it wasn't my birth plan and what I wanted to do. If you are pregnant or want to have a child in the future, I'm sure you'll understand that your course of action of how you want to deliver your baby, obviously different things happen medically that can change this. And if I had to have a C-section, because it was medically necessary, I would have of course done that. But it's very important to have your birth plan, and it was important to me, so I personally didn't want to have a major surgery. That's kind of piggybacking off of last week and kind of giving a little backstory if you weren't able to tune in. But I was concerned, and I voiced these concerns to my doctor, and obviously they encouraged me. They wouldn't push me to have a C-section. Obviously I would, of course I can push him out if that is what I desired and things of that nature. But I really wanted to be able to birth him vaginally, and that was just my personal preference and something that I personally wanted to do. So because of this, I had decided to get induced. I was having no progression. My doctor had swept my membrane. I did lose my mucus plug, but you can technically lose that no matter, like you can lose that and still have the baby weeks later. but nothing was moving forward. And I had to come to the decision, my husband and I had to come to the decision of having an induction. And not to spoil the story, but I'm very happy I did it, and I'm going to obviously share. But my induction date was scheduled about 3 days before my due date. And leading up to then, baby boy was thriving. Everything was okay. If you didn't know, leading up to your labor, I think once you hit about 36 or 37 weeks, you will have to see the doctor weekly. So, everything was checking out, and, I was extremely over being pregnant. I have to say, I feel like moms mention this, but I feel like they don't really mention how much like you were so over being pregnant at this point. And like my belly was huge. Again, baby boy was so big. Like my belly was huge. I even said in the last podcast that if I wanted to turn over at night, I literally had to lift my belly just to get to the other side. And it was tough. Um, but of course, what was more important to me was his health and safety. So like I said, if I did have to have a C-section, I would have done it if it was medically necessary. But for me personally, I just wanted to try to have him naturally, not like naturally with no pain medication, but, just vaginally. But he was growing and growing, and that's why it was my concern. He was thriving in there. So we ended up moving forward with the induction. I I didn't have that magical moment at home that I always wanted, and where my water would break or we'd be somewhere and we would rush to the hospital. And I mentioned in the last podcast, I feel like a lot of people don't talk about that. Like it seems like you may not get that magical moment. And obviously looking back, like no regrets, I'm not depressed about it or upset, but it kind of sucks because it's like that wow moment that you're not going to have. And that can kind of be like sucky, but it just, it is what it is. But going now into my labor story, after prefacing and kind of giving a backstory, the day of the induction, we were scheduled to go in on a Sunday at 7 p.m. in the evening. So my husband and I, we went to Chili's for dinner before we had to go to the hospital. We just wanted to kind of have that last bit of time together. And it was nice to have that time where, we just talked about our excitement and talked about the future and things of that nature. I also wanted to eat a big meal because I kind of knew that I wanted to get the epidural. And if you didn't know, once you get the epidural, you can't eat unless it's like ice chips or whatever. So, I'll never forget that time that I had with my husband because it was just so special and so awesome. But we got to the hospital after I scarfed down like a grilled chicken sandwich or something like that from Chili's. I had to get there and filled out a bunch of paperwork, and they had me get ready in the hospital gown. I remember I washed my hair before and I just kind of, did a little paper routine at home just to kind of prepare. And it's so funny because I remember I took a picture, like a last belly pic, and my belly, it was so big that like I don't know how to explain this, or any other woman can explain this. I didn't have any like stretch marks like around my belly. I had just a little bit like above my pelvis a little bit. And I of course had that I think they call it a linea negra, if I'm going to say that correctly, where women get the brown line on their stomach. And I think no one kind of can explain what that is, and that it comes when you're pregnant and then it leaves, which I was kind of skeptical. I was like, how is this thing going to come and never go away? But lo and behold, I don't have it anymore. Your postpartum is so weird. I'm going to have to like look it up, and you should look it up. I don't know why women get that. Um, I don't know what the science is behind it, but towards the end of my pregnancy, he was very heavy, as I mentioned earlier, and my belly had like started turning red. Like that day, if I go back and look at the picture, my belly, like near my belly button and like where he was, um, it was so red. And I just wonder if my skin was just like over it. And I feel like no one talks about that either. Like the closer and closer you get, you can start getting all these stretch marks, all these different discolorations, and all this type of stuff because your baby is, getting bigger. I think I may butcher this, but they start gaining more weight as like time goes on, even if you go past your due date, they start gaining more weight. But anyway, back to the hospital. I get in, and my whole pregnancy, I didn't struggle with low blood pressure. I was always good. But that specific day, I had low blood pressure. I have no idea why. And it was just weird. Like, they hadn't done anything or anything of that nature. Of course, when you get in there, they check your vitals and stuff. And I just had low blood pressure. And I don't understand why, but I did. So that was a concern. It wasn't like a huge concern, but it was more so something that they wanted to watch. It wasn't like, like it wasn't like like crazy or like an emergency. It was like, oh, she has low blood pressure. We need to watch that and take care of that. So I think they gave me something for that, because I don't really know what caused it. But the first thing they did was check my dilation. And I said in the last podcast, I was like barely dilated. I was like 1 centimeter. And if you didn't know, you have to be 10 centimeters dilated in order for the baby to kind of safely pass through the birth canal. And you have to be 100% effaced. And I don't want to butcher these terms, so please look into it if you're curious, because I'm not a doctor and I don't want to just start like I don't want to just start like saying whatever, but you get the gist. There are things that have to be in check with your body in order for you to safely birth baby and for baby's head to come through the birth canal to come through safely. So I suggest you look into that if you have no idea what I'm talking about. But I feel like most women probably know exactly what I mean by that. So I was still only like a 1 when they checked me, and pretty much what they do to start the induction process is they take this thing, it's like a string, it's called a cervidil, and they pretty much stick it up there. And I really didn't understand what they said it did to my body. Obviously, I wasn't concerned based off of what they told me, but pretty much what it does is it is supposed to get things going and get the ball rolling. And it's supposed to help with dilation, and so that your body can start, going into labor. And just a little side tangent, and I talked about this in the last podcast. No one talks about how hard of a decision that is to like. I'm kind of a natural person. Like, I like my essential oils and I like different things, and I'm not like all natural. You know what I mean? What I mean by that is not plastic surgery, but what I mean is like I like to use natural things. Like, I kind of gravitate towards that. Like, like if I'm sick or something like that, then I will do natural things. I'll also take medication if I feel like I need to, but or if I'm really sick, but I like to lean towards natural things like, hot water with lemon and honey, and just, I like to lean towards natural things. That's just who I am as a person. So it's hard to have to make that decision to force your body to do something. It's hard. And I feel like a lot of women don't talk about that, having to make that, or it's just not talked about enough, really. Especially like in social media, having to make that decision. Like, while I was okay and secure, and me and my husband were both okay and secure with our decision, it is extremely difficult to say, I'm going to force my body to do something, because there can be complications. And my heart goes out to any woman that went in to get induced and had complications, because I can't imagine. But anyway, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but I had to say that because no one wants to talk about that aspect. But anyway, they stuck that thing up there, and it didn't really hurt. It's kind of, it was like a long string that was like hanging out, and I couldn't see it. And I started to getting things, rolling slowly but surely. And I was feeling okay. I couldn't really tell if I was having contractions or not, because I just couldn't tell. Like, I had some like lower back pain, and but it wasn't intense enough for me to be like, oh, oh my God, I'm having a contraction. So at some point, in between, I know they were giving me like fluid. I had like my IV and all that type of stuff in my hand. And I know that they had given me something to help get my blood pressure under control. Baby boy was doing great. And it was just kind of the waiting game. I remember they told me like they didn't say like, oh, he's going to fly out of here in a minute, because the truth about inductions is that it's either super fast or super slow. That's just the reality. And I totally knew that going in. So I remember me and my husband like just started relaxing. I think we started watching Jurassic Park, because that was just kind of what I was in the mood for watching. And I remember I started getting tired and stuff like that. Um, so, we just, chilled and everything. And I remember I started feeling contractions as the night go on went on, and they weren't that intense. Like I could handle them, but I remember they told me that they wanted me to sleep, to prepare for labor, and I was having a hard time sleeping because of it. Like I could handle it, but it was keeping me awake. Um, and I remember also, I think the Cervidil was making me like contract too much. I can't remember at what point that happened, but I was contracting too much. So I think, remember, they took it out at one point and then put it back in because it was like too much. And like, obviously, I wasn't dilated enough. So I think that from my understanding, that wasn't the best. It wasn't harming baby boy, but it wasn't like good because it's like you're contracting, but your body's not ready. You know what I mean? So it was bizarre. And again, it's hard going through this. At least it was for me. I know some women may say like, oh, it was whatever, but at least for me, just forcing your body to do something that it's supposed to do on its own. I know a lot of people may hear and say, well, you should have just waited and stuff like that. But I will get to the end and you will hear why I'm thankful that I did not. And I have no regrets with the induction. And I had a good positive experience at the hospital. But again, sorry, I feel like I'm going on so many tangents. But again, they wanted me to sleep and rest. And I was having a hard time doing that. So at about 3 a.m. Monday morning, I decided to go ahead and get the epidural so that I could start sleeping. I started progressing, I started as far as centimeters and stuff, but I wanted to be able to sleep because I'm like, my body needs to be ready. If I'm just up all night, you know what I mean? But I'm nowhere near ready, then I'm just going to be exhausted and won't have enough energy to, push him out. I do wish I could have gone longer. I feel like if my induction was like earlier in the day and like not bedtime, like if I had like got a good night's sleep, you know what I mean? I think maybe that would have been better, but I don't know. I didn't have any control over the induction time, so it is what it is. But I got the epidural, and I feel like a lot of women are like, "Oh my god, the epidural, da da da." I don't know. Maybe every woman has a different experience, but or maybe it's just my pain tolerance. Like I do have tattoos and piercings, but it just felt like a pinch. It just felt like I've never been stung by a bee, but some people equate it to that. And like, I don't know, I just feel like someone just poked me really hard and it just felt like any other shot. And I know maybe I just had a really good anesthesiologist, which I'm really thankful for. I know a lot of women say that they have back pain because they got the epidural, and they have back pain now, like after baby. But I don't know. And maybe it's just me. Maybe I just had a good anesthesiologist, a good experience. But I have had no back pain, and I've had no like repercussions from getting the epidural. So all I could say is that if you are thinking about getting the epidural, talk to the doctor, learn about the anesthesiologist, just get educated about it. That's what I did. And that's why I felt comfortable getting it. And that's just me. But in my opinion, you compare like the shot of the epidural to the pain of labor. Some women say that it's worse. I don't know. But for me, like, there's no comparison. Like, give me the epidural. But, I feel like a lot of people need to understand that it's also not just a needle. It's like this thing that's actually connected to your back and things like the whole time. Like, again, I'm not a doctor. Please do your research. But it's not just like, okay, here's your epidural shot. Goodbye. There's more to it. So, and I don't want to freak people out because a lot of people are like traumatized by it and stuff. If you're listening and you're a mom and you might be traumatized by the epidural. But, it's not just like, oh, like you're getting like a booster shot. Like, there's more to it. Look into it, but don't scare yourself, okay? Um, and also, another thing too is when you get the epidural, they have to give you a catheter. And I was nervous about that because I never had a catheter. And I feel like no one talks about that part. You get that epidural, but guess what? You're getting a freaking catheter. You're getting a tube, you know, stuck up somewhere. And you already know what I'm talking about, okay? And no one wants to talk about that. Which the good, I hate to say the good thing, but I think once the epidural started kicking in, they gave me the catheter. It really wasn't that bad. But you have to do it because how else are you going to use the bathroom if you can't feel your torso, or just anything below, anything below your torso rather. So I was given the epidural, and they actually gave me this remote where I could press to give myself more, which again, it's not just a shot. You got something stuck in your back. But they gave me this button that I could press to give myself more if I felt like I needed it. And, once I did get the epidural, the numbness came and I couldn't feel anything, which was bizarre, at least from the waist up. So another thing is that once you get the epidural, you're stuck in the bed. Like, you are not getting up. And I feel like, again, no one talks about that either. Like, once you get that epidural, you are stuck in the bed. So hold on to this timeline for me. At 3 a.m., I got the epidural. So just keep that in your mind. And I ate dinner at like 6 p.m. the night before. Keep that little timeline in your head. So, like I said, I obviously couldn't eat and I was only able to have like the ice chips and stuff. But at this point, I wasn't even like hungry. I really wasn't even thinking about food. They give you fluids and stuff like that. So I'm guessing that's just why I wasn't hungry. But I think I was just so focused on labor and giving birth. At some point, my doctor also came in to break my water to kind of help speed the process up, which I remember my husband said that it was kind of cool to watch, or like I didn't see it. I was in the bed and I was numb from the epidural, so I couldn't get up. Um, so now it's Monday, and I wish I could remember a lot of Monday, but I don't. I think I was just so exhausted from the lack of sleep. I remember like certain moments, but I couldn't tell you at what point of the day or what point of Monday that they actually were. I was already not sleeping well, which I mentioned last podcast, because starting at like 32 weeks, I was getting up to use the bathroom like every hour, every other hour, or whatever. And of course it progressed, and that was just before I even like went into labor or got induced. I was always getting up to use the restroom because baby boy was like sitting on my bladder. But unfortunately, I don't remember a lot of Monday, and I wish I did. But because even though I got the epidural, I was still uncomfortable. You know what I mean? So it was tough. So I think I was just exhausted. Um, but I do know that the contractions started to get more intense, and I began progressing as far as dilation, which was great, going from 3, 4, 5, 6, and stuff. And they gave me Pitocin at some point too, which a lot of people have an opinion on Pitocin. And at the end of the day, if you're not going to get induced or whatever, I mean, make your own decisions, right? But a lot of people say that Pitocin is difficult and it makes labor, like the contractions that you get because you're on Pitocin, are worse, which, this is my only labor, so I don't know. But a lot of people say like stray away from Pitocin because of that. But obviously, I already knew what I was getting into, getting induced. So if you are interested in getting induced and you have concerns about Pitocin, talk to a doctor and do research, because it's not, because people just have a lot of opinions on it and there's so much out there about it. So, me, I encourage you to just do your research and do what you got to do. But, speaking of contractions, they're just weird. You know, I've seen what people have said how contractions are like supposed to feel like. Like I've heard people say that it's supposed to feel like this tightening of the belly and this and that or whatever. But like for me, I think it's cuz the epidural, like I was feeling them in my lower back. Like I had this intense lower back pain, which when I get my period, if it's a hit or miss. When it comes to my period, sometimes I have really bad cramps. It used to be worse when I was younger, but getting older, it's kind of leveled out a little bit, thank God. um, but whenever I do have pain from my period, it's in my lower back. So I wonder if my body was just, channeling that. But I had intense lower back pain, and I know some people call it back labor. And it was so intense that my husband was consistently like massaging my lower back. I would lay on my side and he was massaging it. I remember he said that his hands were so sore from massaging my lower back just to help with the pain. Because I feel like the epidural like wasn't hitting that part. It was like it was hitting everything else but my freaking lower back. I don't know. But apparently, obviously the epidural is not, it's supposed to just ease the pain. It's not supposed to take it away completely, I guess, I suppose. But it was extremely painful. And as time gone on, it got more and more painful. It was like the only part that the epidural wasn't saving me from, like I said. But, typically I would get a contraction and I'd have the lower back pain. And once the contraction was over, I'd be like, oh, I would breathe, whatever. But it got to the point where the pain wasn't subsiding. It's like I was having like this ongoing contraction that was like never stopping. And it was tough, and they tried giving me more epidural and it helped. And then it didn't help. And I was, excuse me, I was in agony. Like when the pain would come, I was struggling, but I was pressing through. I was pressing through, the best way that I could and knew how. I remember it was late Monday night and I started feeling really sick. I started gagging and I started throwing up, and I was about 8 centimeters. And a lot of people say that once you start throwing up, you're very close to labor, um, which I'll get to in just a second. But I was struggling. I remember they gave me like one of those little barf bags, and I was struggling. And I think I wasn't even looking because I was so exhausted and I didn't want to look at it because I was like grossed out. But I remember my husband had said that, he was like, you really didn't throw out that much. You were gagging more than anything. So I was like, oh, okay, well, whatever. But it had gotten to the point where my blood pressure was an issue again, not like a crazy, crazy issue, but it was a concern. And baby's heart rate was dropping because at this point, my water had been broken for like 13 hours. So my doctor came in and she checked on me and she wanted to talk options. My doctor was honestly amazing. Like, if we have baby number two, I'm going to her. She was with me throughout my entire pregnancy, and she was there just for everything, and she was just so great. And there was also no pressure. Like, she was so great. She listened to me, and I just loved that. So if you can, please find a doctor that listens to you and is there for you, like my doctor was, because it just helps throughout the entire journey. But she came in and, she was just stating the facts. Like my blood pressure was a concern again. Baby's heart rate was dropping. My water had been broken for 13 hours. And she was stating all these things, and that, they were a concern. And it is a concern, like baby's heart rate and my blood pressure and my water being broken for that amount of time and things like that. And I was stuck at 8 centimeters. And she had just brought it up to me like, hey, I just want to bring it up to you. The option of C-section, I just want you to think about it, because where we're at right now, you know, it's not good for baby to stay in there. Like we need to do something to help get baby out at this point for his health and safety. So she said she'd give me time to discuss it with my husband and to take my time. So I started bawling my eyes out. I was crying, crying, crying. And I feel like no one talks about how hard that conversation can be, to where you are right there. Like I was at 8 centimeters. You have to be at 10. And another thing is like once you're so far along, I could have went to 10 centimeters in the next 5 minutes. Like that's how it is. Like the farther you get, the closer you like it won't take that long for me to get to 10 centimeters. So I was crying and I was just I was just so upset. And it was such a hard conversation to have with my doctor, because I was like, I'm so close. You know what I mean? I'm so freaking close. I could literally birth him in an hour if I could just get to 10. You know what I mean? And no one wants to talk about how hard this conversation is, to be at a place where, you have to make a decision in a moment when you're kind of in distress. You know what I mean? I was having contractions, I was feeling sick, and I have to make that decision and I'm not blaming anybody. It's no one's fault. But like, think about having to make like a major decision to have a major surgery. Obviously, if it was, a medically necessary, potentially, like that's important. But imagine the state of mind that you're in when you have to make that type of decision. No one wants to talk about that. No one says how hard that can be, to have to make a decision like that when you are exhausted, in turmoil, in pain, and all that type of stuff. Like it's hard because you're not even able to think clearly. And I just wish that more people would talk about this aspect. And, I started asking my doctor about, how does the C-section work? How long is it? What happens? And in my heart, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I just feel like this isn't like for me, that's just what I wanted to do. But obviously, my most important concern was the health and safety of our son and of myself. Um, my baby's heart rate was dropping, and I felt like I was so close. I remember telling my husband, I was like, I'm so close. I just want to birth him vaginally. Like, I'm so close. And I felt so defeated. And then I'm starting to question myself. Was I right to do this induction? Was I right to do this? And it was just hard. And, the nurse said, she and the doctor stepped out. They said they would give us time to discuss if that's something that we would want to do. And again, I was crying because I felt so defeated. I was so close. I wanted so badly to push him out myself. You know what I mean? Because now if I was like stuck at a 3, you know what I mean, then I'd be like, okay, you know what I mean? There's no time to wait to get to 10. Like, I would totally say, okay, we need to do C-section, even though I'm very, I didn't want to. You know what I'm saying? Like, but because I was so close and I knew, I was like, I could dilate to 10 in 5 to 10 minutes. That's how your body works when you're so close. I was just so sad because I was like, I'm not stuck at a 2 or a 3. If I was stuck at a 2 or a 3, okay, there's no time to get to 10. Get this, get my son out. Do whatever we have to do. But because I was so close, I was heartbroken because I was like, I just want to push him out. So, me and my husband, we came together, and my husband and I, we prayed. And, we just had a moment where we just prayed. And the nurse came in and she saw that I was crying. And I pretty much just explained it to her. I was like, look, I understand. Healthy baby needs to get here in a healthy way. But I'm so close. I know you have to understand how hard that decision is. I could be wheeled to the operating room and go to a 10, but it's already in place. There's no going back. You see what I'm saying? And these are the thoughts that I'm, having in my mind. The contractions and back pain were intense, and I laid back to relax for a moment. And I remember she said she talked to my doctor, and I think I heard her tell my husband that my doctor said, let's just give her an hour, We'll keep an eye on baby's heart rate and everything. Like, it wasn't dropping significantly to where they had to send me to the operating room, immediately. It was more so like, hey, this is becoming a concern. We need to talk about this before things become, before it needs to become like an emergency. And I remember she said, let's give her an hour. And the next thing I know, I was falling asleep. Now, again, you have to remember, like I said, I don't remember a lot of Monday. Maybe they told me this, maybe they didn't, maybe they told my husband. Like, I don't remember and I don't care at this point. But my husband told me after that they gave me sleeping medication. They felt that I was too tense from throwing up, the back pain, and that my body needed to rest. And I also didn't sleep that well. That my body needed to relax. And maybe if my body could relax, I could get to the 10 centimeters. And they were right. An hour or so later, I was slightly waking up. My husband was knocked out on the freaking couch or whatever they have. And I looked at baby's heart rate monitor, and it was normal. It was at a good rate. And I was like, oh, okay. And I woke up, and I wasn't like confused, but I woke up and I was like, The nurse came in, and I was kind of in and out of sleep. And she woke my husband up, and she said, I'm gonna check her dilation. And lo and behold, I was 10 centimeters. I couldn't believe it. She was stunned and shocked, but I could because, like I said, my husband and I prayed, so we had the faith. And she called and notified my doctor and said, let's start doing some practice pushes. So I was like, let's go. Now, at this point, I was super tired, but I was like, I'm ready. Let's go. I'm here. We're doing this. Let's get it done. So we did some practice pushes with the nurse for like 30 minutes or so, and baby was moving down, and and I was doing really well. And it's funny because I remember the Packers game was on the TV, and I remember for some reason I was in a super talkative mood. I was like telling the nurse our whole life story of how we had moved from Chicago to Georgia and all that type of stuff. And eventually it became time for my doctor to come in, and my husband and the nurse, they could see baby boy's head. So all the doctors came in, the nurses, they started setting up the room and getting things ready for the delivery. And doctor was like, okay, when you feel contraction, we're going to start pushing. So I would push when the contractions came, and sometimes shortly after that, baby boy was born. I feel like a lot of people talk about like the ring of fire, which is pretty much what a lot of women can feel when the baby's head comes through. I have to say, like, as far as him coming out, like, I could feel pressure, like in my pelvic area and things like that, but like, I did not feel that whole ring of fire situation. And just as far as, like, just as far as like the whole thing, like, I could feel him come out, but like, it actually didn't hurt. I couldn't feel it because I had the epidural. So obviously, that's the reason why I couldn't feel it. And I remember when he came out, I just put my head back and they laid him in my lap and I looked at him, but I was still like so like out of it and like exhausted and tired. And they took him and they wrapped him up. They do when they give him like the vitamin K shot, and where they weigh him, and they took him over to that part, and cut the umbilical cord. All that type of stuff was going on. And I remember I was crying because I was just so happy and excited and thrilled, and me and my husband were just so happy that he was here. And I remember I asked, while they were like weighing him and like cleaning him off and stuff, I was like, how much does he weigh? And our baby boy, which by the way, he was born, actually he ended up being born on his due date. My induction was scheduled 2 days before the due date, and went in Sunday night, and he was born at 4 a.m. Tuesday morning, 4:40 to be exact. And he weighed 9 pounds and 5 ounces. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. No wonder I've been struggling and he's been so freaking heavy. It was just insane. And it's crazy because my doctor had estimated that he would be like 8.8 or 8.9, but baby boy was 9 pounds and 5 ounces. I freaking pushed out a 9 pound baby. So this is why I say I 1,000% do not regret my decision to get induced, because a lot of, like I said before, a lot of first time babies tend to stay and they want to hang out. Some don't, but some want to hang out and they could push you to 41, 42 weeks. He could have been 10 or 11 pounds. And I think that that would have been a lot more scarier. So that is why I don't regret my decision to be induced. 9.5 pounds. Like, can you believe that? And I remember, he was in my lap, so I saw him, but like, my brain wasn't registering everything just because of the exhaustion and what had just happened. And I remember my husband was like, babe, he looks just like you. And it's crazy because I feel like he looks like a good combination of both of us, but he looks mostly like me. And there's just some times where he just looks just like me, and he's like my literal twin, which is just crazy. But moving forward through the process, my doctor started working on me and getting the placenta out, which that was actually really painful. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about that. They have to like push on your stomach to get it out. And it's almost like giving birth again. It was more so just uncomfortable than pushing on my stomach and pushing it out versus it actually coming out, but it was uncomfortable. And I feel like nobody talks about that either. And I was kind of like half awake, and I through all of this, and I like remember it, but I don't. But eventually they gave him to me, and this is a sensitive part that I'm going to talk about. This is another part that I feel like nobody talks about. And I like, me personally, I've never heard, I haven't heard a woman talk about this or be mentioned on social media, but it is something that I really, really want to share. I have pictures of myself holding our son for the first time. but I have a very faint memory, unfortunately. I don't really remember it. It's not clear in my mind. I was so tired, exhausted, hungry. My body was shot at this point. And, with that, your brain can sometimes struggle with, just functioning normally. And I don't have a clear enough memory of me holding my son for the first time. And, that really sucks. And that is really hard. And I feel like not enough women talk about how that can happen. Obviously, like, I remember it, but it's not clear enough in my mind. So whenever I want to think about it, I have to look at pictures. That's all I have. And I look at the picture and I'm like, I don't remember. I was like, I do, but I don't, you know? And I'm just so thankful that I have pictures, because if I didn't, I don't know how I would be able to remember that moment. Birth, labor, it's so taxing on the body that there are parts that you may not remember. Like I said, I don't even remember Monday because it was just so much going on and my body was going through so much. I couldn't even tell you what happened that day. I remember I have like bits and pieces, little puzzle pieces, you know? We did skin to skin, and it's like I have faint memories of that. And he did skin to skin with my husband. I do remember that a little bit better. And we were going to be moved from the delivery unit to the postpartum unit where we would stay until we were released. So now I kind of want to go into like the postpartum discussion and aspect of the podcast. But pretty much what they do, it's not like right away. Like after we did skin to skin, after we got everything, together, they put me in a wheelchair. And I remember I was struggling to stay awake. My body was so weak, and I was just struggling. And I remember they were like, okay, we're going to give you your baby. And I remember I asked, I was like, can you guys hold him? Because I was so tired. Like I didn't have any strength. And I remember they told me, well, actually, you have to be the one to hold him while we get you from one unit to the next. And I remember I was terrified, you know, because I just was like, I'm afraid I'm going to drop my baby. So I remember they put me in the wheelchair and I was holding him. I have faint memories of this. And I remember distinctly praying to God, Lord, please don't let me drop my baby. Please help me and give me the strength to get from one room to the next, because my arms are weak. I'm sitting and they're wheeling me. Like they're the ones pushing me. I'm giving no effort here, and I have no strength to even hold my baby right now. I couldn't even keep my arms up, but by the grace of God, I made it to the postpartum unit. I did not drop him. And I remember when we got in there, I believe my husband or a nurse took him, and they, helped get me all set up on the bed and everything. At this point, it's obviously super early in the morning. They were trying to find snacks for me because the cafeteria wasn't open yet. And I remember they eventually put him in his bassinet because he was sleeping or whatever, or they gave him like a bottle or something because I was trying to breastfeed, but he wasn't latching just yet, which is normal. And obviously I didn't have any milk yet, just the colostrum, which is just kind of like, it's kind of like pre-milk in a sense. And pretty much, like I mentioned, he was put in his bassinet, and I just remember at some point I like passed out. um, I don't even know. Like I said, I remember they got me set up on the bed, but I think I had wanted to get up. I think I was like, I have to use the restroom, like, whatever. And they were trying to help me. And at some point, like, I either passed out or almost did. I don't really remember, to be honest. I remember the nurses kind of had to help me stand up because I was just, I was exhausted. I was in labor for a really long time. And the nurses and my husband had to help me get back in the bed. And my husband said I fell asleep, which I don't even remember doing. He said that I asked them if I could sleep. And they're like, yes, of course. So, for like 3 hours, I was out. And I didn't even mean to. Like, I vaguely remember this. So it was just him and our son for a while. And again, like those first moments that, you want to have, depending on your situation, may be difficult. You may not have them, which of course I'm happy that my husband was able to bond with him for that time. So obviously, no regrets there. Um, at some point, I woke up and I saw that our son was in his bassinet. The nurse came in and asked what I wanted to eat, so that they could put an order in for the cafeteria. And, they brought me my food. But I remember baby boy started crying, so I picked him up and put him on my chest, and he stopped, and we did skin to skin. I fell asleep again. They brought me my food, and I didn't even eat it, and I should have ate. I remember later, the nurse came in and was like, "You didn't eat?" And she was like concerned, and I was like, "Oh no, I guess I fell back to sleep," because I had put my son on, on my chest, and I was holding him. Um, in which I'm happy because I remember these memories, a lot clearer. So, which is really good and nice. Um, but to sum it up, we stayed in the hospital until Thursday. He was born Tuesday morning. And the reason why is because my blood pressure was getting weird again. So they were watching that. Baby boy had a little bit of jaundice as well, which, again, please look into these terms. It's just something that it's so common with babies with like their skin. They kind of look orange. And a lot of babies have to go into like the NICU for it, like the children's ICU. Um, but he did not have it bad enough. It was more so like they were just watching it to see. And also, he had a little heart murmur. The heart murmur went away, thank God. And the jaundice, it was to the point where, I don't mean to skip ahead, but we ended up being able to leave as long as we can get him to his pediatrician, or a pediatrician the next day if we weren't going to see the hospital one, so that they could just reassess his jaundice, as he, went on to see if he needed any further assistance with that. And pretty much what they do, the only way to help jaundice is to put them on like under blue lights. I guess that's like what regulates it, which I don't mean to get ahead of myself, but that's what we ended up doing. But whatever, because I'm not going to talk too much about that. This is more so about the postpartum aspect. But we had to do that. But there are a few things I just want to touch on. Walking after birth, tough, okay? Like, it just, you have to like get used to it. It could be very difficult, and it's kind of like learning how to walk again. The first shower feels amazing, but also I feel like something people talk about, but I feel like not enough, is that it takes time for your belly to go down. Like, you 100% still look pregnant, after you have the baby. Like, you still look pregnant. It takes time for your belly to go down. And when after baby's born, it's almost like you have like a balloon, like your belly's kind of like deflated. It's so weird and like squishy. And then there's the whole thing of like diastasis recti, which is ab separation that you may or may not have, which is totally common for women, which just means your abs separate because your belly is so huge. And there's different workouts and things that you can do to get that regulated, and under control. If you want to get your belly to go back to normal and heal your ab separation. But overall, like, your recovery is really just going to depend on how things went. I had second degree tearing, which you can just imagine. I was in a lot of pain for a long time. I was popping ibuprofen, Motrin, like for months, like, and everything. They even gave me stronger medication. I did not take it. I could have taken it while breastfeeding, but I didn't, just because I knew it would knock me out and make me sleepy. And I just didn't want to be in that realm with like a newborn. I just felt like it wasn't safe for me. Um, but you also like bleed a lot after labor. You can bleed up to 2 or more weeks. You have to wear these giant pads, disposable underwear, ice packs in your underwear. There's these things called tucks, or like these little pads, which are like witch hazel pads, which help with the healing down there and the stitches, because I had to get several stitches, because I had second degree tearing. And, all of this, you're trying to manage all of that. Just like imagine your period, and bleeding, which in my opinion, you bleed more. It does go down though as time goes on. So think of a period, you could have really heavy days, and then as time goes on, it starts to regulate itself and go away. That's kind of how it is, but it can go on for a few weeks. I think I only bled for like 2.5 weeks or so, and then it was just spotting, which is normal. Like I mentioned, we left the hospital, Thursday afternoon, and, at the hospital, baby boy latched really well. So we began our breastfeeding journey, which I'm happy to say we are still continuing. He's not primarily breastfed, but he still breastfeeds, and I'm super happy. I know you may say, why are you breastfeeding him after a year? According to the American Pediatric Center, you can, and it's more so, I'm not, obviously, he's eating more now that he's over 12 months, but still continuing it. May or may not continue until he's 18 months, which is actually very normal, but I'm still kind of reevaluating that and how to wean and stuff like that. But anyway, we began our breastfeeding journey, and he was primarily breastfed, primarily, at least for like the first 3 months of his life. Then we started incorporating formula and things of that nature to supplement. Which only reason why I want to bring that up as far as postpartum, because that can actually be very difficult for a lot of women. A lot of women struggle with breastfeeding. The breastfeeding journey can be very hard. So you can imagine like trying to take care of yourself and have all this aftercare for you, and then also trying to like feed your baby. And, I feel like people cannot prepare me for how much baby wants to breastfeed. A lot of times breastfed babies want more because breast milk is easier to digest, so they digest it a lot quicker than formula. Sometimes every baby's different. So like babies need a lot of milk. So he was like on the boob like every hour and a half to 2 hours, which is how much you're supposed to feed a newborn. And I did not know that. So again, all this aftercare, you're popping pills because you're in pain.
I feel
and
like
you're bleeding
not
like crazy,
enough people
and you're also trying
talk
to feed
about
a human
this,
being. Like
okay?
it is a lot, and it
The
could be a lot
first
on
poop.
mental health and just
Now you may be
on
like,
your
what
mind,
the heck?
and your emotions are still
Lord
all over
have
the
mercy,
place. Like
that
you're pregnant
first
because you have all
poop.
these hormones
So if
trying
you're a
to
mom or
re-regulate
you're pregnant,
you probably just looked into
which can
postpartum
be,
care, so you probably know about this. But
really,
if you haven't
really
had
tough.
children and you're just interested, but as far as
Please listen to
postpartum
me.
at home, prepare yourselves. The first poop. I was warned about it. They tell you in the hospital and even beforehand, like, take stool softeners. Now, I didn't have any. I dropped the ball, and I should have taken them at the hospital, because they say that it could be very, very difficult to poop. It could be very uncomfortable, very painful, just because of everything that went on down there. So obviously I left the hospital, and I think that day, like, I was gonna take a stool softener or something like that, or I took one or whatever, and didn't think I would have to poop so soon. So our first night home, baby boy woke up in the middle of the night, totally normal to feed. So I breastfed him, got him back in his mini crib. My husband was sleeping, changed baby's diaper, and I was like, ooh, and in my head, I'm like, oh, this is our first night. Like, everything's going well. That's what I'm thinking. He fed good. He didn't even cry. Like, I could just tell he was hungry, just because he was like making some, like, there's a certain noise that babies make when they're hungry. And if you're a mom, you kind of learn that. And I had already learned it from like him being in the hospital. So fed him, and I was like, oh, everything's going well. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go, because something about postpartum, like I mentioned, you have all that going on down there. You got the freaking disposable underwear, you have the ice pack, you have the witch hazel pads, and you have all this stuff. So I was like, okay, let me go get myself cleaned up. Like, that was kind of my mindset. I was like, oh yeah, let me just go like change like my pad and get myself cleaned up, and then I'm going to go back to sleep. And I was feeling pretty good. I was obviously in pain. I like took some ibuprofen, ate a quick snack so it wouldn't hurt my stomach, and I was feeling really good again about the night. So I don't care if it's TMI. I'm just gonna be honest because someone needs to hear it. All right. As I'm sitting on the toilet, I'm cleaning myself, and I feel like I'm about to have a bowel movement, and I was like, oh no, it's here. And I was like, no. I think at that point, either I took the stool softener, I said I was going to take it in the morning, like I couldn't remember. I can't remember. But I was like, oh no. I was worried. And the reason why they say take a stool softener is so that it can pass through easier, so that you're not straining and like trying to push your poop out, because that can be very, painful for your stitches and all that type of stuff. So I'm like, oh God. Oh my God. And I was like, not ready. I was not ready. Let's just say, because I don't want to get too gross on this podcast, but I pooped. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. My advice is don't push. I'm sorry if this grossed any of you out, okay? But some mama out there, mama to be, needs to know the truth, okay? And I just remember I was like, okay, that wasn't that bad. It hurt more after. So I cleaned myself up and I was like, I cannot believe that just happened. And I was like, I will say, I was like teary eyed. That's how painful it was. Um, but I went back to sleep and I was just like, oh, whew, I'm like scarred for life after that. No, it was fine, but it's hard. Take your freaking stool softener when you get in the hospital. Do not wait, because I was not prepared. Like, I didn't feel like I had to poop, and all of a sudden at freaking like 4 a.m., you know what I mean, after a feed and diaper change and all that type of stuff, I had to go, and it was just crazy, and I just couldn't believe it. But please take your stool softeners, ladies. Um, anyway, continuing into my postpartum journey. Like I said, my bleeding stopped after a couple weeks. And, I was taking care of myself, wearing the ice packs and all that type of stuff that I mentioned. Totally recommend disposable underwear. The Freedom Moms is like the best. I loved it because it was kind of like boy shorts, but it also like came up my tummy and it just made things feel put together. You feel really like, I know some may say like you're not going to want to wear tight clothing, which I didn't, but when it came to like stretchy stuff like that, like you just kind of feel, I don't know, just all over the place. And that just kind of felt things like, just intact. I just kind of felt like things were like back intact, which was nice. Um, but again, with all this going on, you're trying to learn a new human, which is tough. And, your husband and partner can only do so much, especially if you're exclusively breastfeeding or pumping or doing formula, whatever way, fed is best. Um, the whole aspect can just be challenging, and there's so many diaper changes, and you're trying to figure out baby sleep, which I could do a whole podcast on that in itself. And because babies, they're not meant to sleep through the night for, just they're not developably, their brains are not, and their bodies are not developmentally there to be able to do those type of things. So you're waking up, you're losing sleep, and it's just a lot having a newborn. But the postpartum aspect of trying to heal your body, it can be very difficult. And I feel like it wasn't until like I started following like certain like mommy bloggers or watching YouTube videos, I did not know how hard postpartum can be. But it can just be like, it can almost be harder than the birth, and just hard. And by that, I just mean because it's longer. Like birth, you get through it. But with postpartum, like it goes on and on for several weeks. And like I know for myself, like, you know, I was taking ibuprofen and having pain for up to like 3 months postpartum. Like I said, I had second degree tearing. And, I went to my 6 week appointment, which, if you didn't know, you have a 6 week appointment after your, after labor and after birth, where the doctor just checks and makes sure you're healing okay and will clear you to get back into fitness if that's something that you want to do. And I remember my doctor cleared me, and I remember I was so terrified of my doctor's appointment because I was still having pain down there, and I knew she was going to have to check me. And I was so nervous about it because I was like, oh my God, like I'm in pain down there. She's going to have to go inspect and make sure everything's okay. She did say that everything was healing great. I told her about my pain, and she said, that was normal because of the tearing and how big my son was. So it was hard. I remember, it was hard. I remember like I said, I was still taking medication and just bending over, like random things like bending over and doing things were painful for me. And there were certain things I couldn't do. I'm not going to get into it because it's TMI, but for several months after, even though I wanted to. And, every woman has a different experience. But I'm sure that there are some out here that can like resonate with this. And I feel like it's important to talk about. A lot of women ask like, does it work the same down there? Um, does it work the same? Does it feel the same? Does it look the same? Yes. All like everything pretty much goes back to normal almost. For me it's like it's the same down there, but it's also different. And, I don't really know how to explain that. I don't want to get too graphic, but just want to just give a heads up. I'm even a year postpartum, and everything works the same, and everything eventually does go back to normal. Again, you stop bleeding, you don't have to do this. Pooping is not hard. Peeing is not as difficult, because that can even be difficult postpartum, depending on how you tore or if you tore or anything like that. But things may feel different. As far as, I don't know, like, I don't want to get like too graphic. I feel like I got a lot of graphic talking about the poop. But like, things will go back to normal, but you'll know it's different. And I think that's what it is. It's like, you'll know that it's a little bit different. I don't know. I hope that makes sense. I think that a lot of people don't talk about your pelvic floor, which again, I encourage you to do research on that. It can be weakened after labor, and you have to do exercises, and you may have to get examinations and different things to get that back in check. So, it's not just like, for some women, yes, you may not tear, you may have no issues and ride off to the sunset. God bless you. I'm so happy for you, like, truly, because a lot of us don't experience that. But, you can really have like weakened pelvic floor and weakened muscles down there. Like, I remember after birth, like, I couldn't control farting. Like, I'm just gonna be dead honest. Like, I could not control it, like, at all. You know what I mean? And it was months after where I still like struggle with that. And I wasn't like ripping them like left and right, but like certain muscles down there are just hard to control. I remember I would sneeze and pee a little. You know what I mean? And again, this goes back to your pelvic floor, and when those things are weak, and these type of things can happen. So I just feel like a lot of that nobody talks about postpartum, that you can have some things where you may have to see a specialist, and you may have to get extra assistance from your doctor to get things back in order because of what your body just went through. So I just wanted to talk about that for a second. Just as far as postpartum journey again, after a few months, I did start feeling like myself physically, somewhat. But I feel like no one talks about the fact that you could be a year postpartum and still not feel like yourself, and you may still be working on loving your body. Like, I'm totally in this boat. I talked about it in my Body Image and Society Views podcast, but like, right now I'm kind of on a health kick. And I just started, I know it sounds like stupid basic to say, but it just started today, where I really want to start eating more healthier. But I was eating really healthy and really taking care of myself before pregnancy. And then I got pregnant and had all these cravings, and I just gave in. I ate healthy, but I was giving in to my cravings, whatever. Most of us do that, right? But for me, like even a year postpartum, I struggle with ditching those pregnancy eating habits. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of hard, kind of getting back to where you were. And I'm not talking about like trying to get your body back, but more so like your habits of like your eating and different things like that. And again, I feel like nobody talks about that. No one talks about how, like, you may have been super healthy, and it's just kind of hard to get back into that, especially when you have a baby, running around by a year old, and just being a mom in general, you don't have time for a lot of stuff. So sometimes, I'm not going to say you don't have time for like healthy eating, but healthy eating can sometimes take a lot of prep work and different things that you just may not have time for. And you grabbing that little snack so you can get it just to eat, so you could just freaking eat today, is sometimes just the quickest thing to do. So it can be really difficult. And again, nobody talks about this stuff. I know for me, like, I'm trying to get back into eating healthy and being healthy with fitness and different things. Those are my goals, just so that I can be a healthier person. I'm not trying to achieve a specific weight, but I just want to be healthy. I want to, be strong and things of that nature. And then there is, all the influencers you see on Instagram, who you just see them snap back and all this type of stuff. And it could just be hard to watch that, because it's like you see all these women on Instagram where they have a baby and they go get their tummy tuck and they go all this stuff, which do whatever you want to do. But I just feel like they don't perpetuate what women are actually really dealing with. And they just post the highlight reel of them losing all this weight after pregnancy, or doing this or doing that, when for most women it's actually really difficult to kind of get back into things. But also, there's postpartum depression, which is very real. I'm going to provide some resources in the description of the podcast so that if you or someone you know is dealing with postpartum depression, I highly encourage you to please seek counsel and help. Postpartum depression is actually more common than people talk about, and it's something that needs to be dealt with. You deserve to get help, you deserve to be loved, and you deserve to live a happy and healthy life with your new beautiful baby. So I just want to provide those resources. But I feel like a lot of more women go through it than more women talk about. I feel like some women struggle with it and don't even know they're struggling with it, which again is extremely difficult. But things do get easier. You learn more about your new baby. Your body gets stronger and it recovers. And, it just takes time. And you really just have to give yourself grace. You just have to be patient with yourself and patient with the process and know that, at the end of the day, your body did something incredible and your body did something just so beautiful and amazing. And for me, like I said, I am a little bit over 12 months, almost 13 months postpartum. I had a lot of challenging moments. I had a lot of great moments, but I'm happy where I am. And, I just know that, it feels like yesterday I just had my baby boy. You know what I mean? So trying to be positive and just, you got to try to see life with, at least I tried to see life with a glass half full versus half empty. And just know wherever you are in the postpartum journey or wherever you may end up, it does get better. Like it really does. I remember I was at a point a year ago where baby boy was almost a month old and it was tough, but I'm here now and I'm like, it really does get better. It takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of endurance, and a lot of strength. But I believe that every mama has that strength in her. And it's like we are given that when we have our child or children. So I just wish more people would talk about some of the stuff that I touched on today, which is why I made the podcast. Because I just feel like there's so much that women go through that just women are not seen sometimes. And they're not seen in these moments. And they need to be and they should be. So I just want to encourage anyone listening to this podcast, any moms, mom-to-bees, or if you want to be a parent one day, just know that it is a journey and the after journey can seem longer than anything else, but it's worth it. It really is. And, just watching my son run around now as a toddler now and just thinking about my pregnancy and thinking about the labor and birth, it is so true when they say you forget it. Because like for me, I think about that like back pain. I remember it, but for some reason, like I can't think about what that pain was. It's like you really do forget. I don't know what it is. I mean, the Bible talks about it, but like I don't know what it is. You really do like forget when you have your precious son or daughter in your arms and you're putting them to bed at night or just whatever it is. You really do forget. And it's just such a beautiful and amazing experience. And I commend any mom who out there who may be listening that has had a difficult postpartum journey or even an easy journey. We're all in different positions and we go through different things. Everyone has a different journey. Your journey may be totally different than mine, and that's okay. I think that every journey is valid, whatever you may have gone through. But I do want to wrap up. Don't want to make this too long. I know the last podcast was long too, but thank you so much for tuning in and hearing my postpartum and labor story. It was definitely insane, but I'm so thankful. I personally do not regret getting induced because baby boy was huge and postpartum was tough, but I got through it. And we women, we're strong. We're made for this. Our bodies are made for this, and we get through it. And again, I'm going to put some resources for postpartum depression in the description so that if you or someone you know is dealing with that, I highly encourage you to seek counsel and help. Just know that you're not alone, and more women go through this than most women would admit. And I think that we need to normalize when women are dealing with postpartum. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Please check out the podcast on all streaming platforms, Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Also leave a comment or a like or a review. I really appreciate that. Also follow on Instagram, My So-Called Thoughts Pod. Again, it's at My So-Called Thoughts Pod. But thank you again for so much, especially if you turned into technically the first part of this about when no one tells you about pregnancy, my story. And thank you so much for listening now to the next part of the story, my labor and postpartum story. I just want to encourage, again, any mom out there, whatever you may be facing, I pray that you will get through it and you will have the strength to get through it. Or if you're a father, if you're a parent, I just pray, Lord, that whatever you're dealing with as a parent, that you get through, you will find the resources that you need, the help that you need to continue to raise your child to be amazing, smart, and that they grow and, we all just ride off into the sunset. In Jesus' name. But thank you again so much for tuning in this podcast. And once again, this is Sunray, and I'm out. Peace.